Hello, and thank you all for taking the time to meet and answer some of the questions we didn't have time to get through on the webinar on Wednesday. So we received a huge number of questions on Wednesday, and this is an opportunity for us to answer those that were outstanding that we didn't get time to answer live. So my name is Zoe Lloyd. I'm an animal health and welfare scientist at AHDB, and I'll just do sort of round the room and ask you all to please introduce yourself for anyone who may have missed the webinar last week. Fiona, can I start with you?
Yes, I'm Fiona Lovett, and I'm a sheep vet. I'm up in the northeast of England, and I've sort of been involved with the Battle Bluetongue campaign over the last couple of years.
Brilliant. Thanks, Fiona. Phil?
Yeah, I'm Phil Stocker. I'm Chief Executive of the National Sheep Association and a member of the DEFRA core group as well, that has been keeping a close eye on Bluetongue over the last couple of years now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. And Neil?
Thank you, Zoe. Neil Shine, CEO of the National Beef Association, and also, like Phil, a member of the DEFRA core group, which we've been looking, we've been following this since November 2023.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. Right, we'll waste no time and we'll get into these questions. So we'll start off with a few on vaccinations. We've had a couple on when the best time is to vaccinate, and is it too late to vaccinate with regards to breeding, etc. So Fiona, could I perhaps start us off with that one?
Yeah, so the best time to vaccinate for any disease is before the disease reaches you. So for Bluetongue, we know we expect cases across Europe. We expect cases from early July onwards. So vaccination must be completed before then, and it must be at least 28 days before disease first arrives to have full immunity from that vaccine. So arguably, the last date you want to be vaccinating is the end of June. We know for this year, we're past that. So it's kind of the sooner the better.
Brilliant. Does anyone else want to come in on that one?
Well only just as go on, Neil. Yeah.
I was just going to say that we're in a situation at the moment where there's a live disease challenge, so any time's better than no time. But in an ideal world, I think, for cattle, because I think we should accept that these airborne diseases are here to stay. This strain is going to challenge us next year, the year after. October, November might be the best time for spring calving cows, and so they get that highest immunity protection, or they reach immunity long before the summer challenge comes, and it means they're not handled post-calving. There might be BVD vaccines, but it just takes one of those vaccines away from the spring workload.
And just to add to that, from a sheep perspective, I think Fiona said, spring is the ideal time, and the reason for that, of course, is because this is a midge-borne virus, and those midges normally get active when the temperatures rise, and you get into July, and you want those animals to be protected well in advance of that. And that's why spring for the sheep sector, the spring vaccination would be the ideal time, so that animals are protected and safe before you come to that high risk midge transmission period.
But actually, Zoe, I know there's a further on question about, can people vaccinate their pregnant ewes at the same time as they do their clostridial vaccination? And I know last year a number of practices did have people, so usually we would say keep a vaccine 2 weeks away from especially any live vaccine. With Bluetongue in Europe, we know people have been doing multiple Bluetongue vaccinations at the same time. And certainly we've had in the UK people vaccinate Bluetongue vaccine alongside the clostridial vaccine. It's not recommended by the manufacturers, but people have accepted that it's not detrimental to either vaccine. So as far as we know, that has not been a problem, and people have found that convenient for their when they're giving that dose pre-lambing. So that's, we sometimes have to compromise, and we don't always get best practice in.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant.
I mean, it's worth just saying as well, within the context of where we are now, with such an increase in the numbers of Bluetongue cases, that people outside of those hotspot zones, we know that there's a real lag in reporting times. We know anecdotally that there are cases that are likely to be reported across the country, but people outside of those hotspot zones again, they need to be thinking about protecting their animals. And in all honesty, now is the best time to vaccinate to protect those animals. In saying that, we know that the vaccines aren't always easy to come by just at the moment, but if you can get them, now is the best time to do it.
Absolutely. And I know you touched upon it there. We are starting to see clinical cases right the way across England and into Wales as well. And the onset of immunity, depending on the vaccine brand, is sort of 3 to 4 weeks after completion of the primary vaccination course. But how good is the immune response at protecting the animals from Bluetongue clinical disease right away? Will there be some level of protection and immune response shortly after the vaccine is administered?
That's got to be one for Fiona, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, it basically takes 3 to 4 weeks, as you say, for full immunity. A vaccine, the way a vaccine works is it triggers the body for the immune response to happen, and that is at a minimum going to take a week or two. So you can't expect a vaccine to be working the following day, but it's not like nothing happens for the whole 28 days until there's full immunity. So the main problem at the moment is because we've got a lot of people facing active disease. Vaccinating and facing the disease is pretty horrific, and vaccinating at exactly the same time as a disease hits, the disease will have effects. There's no two ways about it. Any animal that hasn't been protected a good couple of weeks before that disease hits is likely to face clinical signs.
And Fiona, there will be people now that are unvaccinated and they're starting to see clinical signs, and they're asking those questions, aren't they? I've got it in my flock on my premises. Should I vaccinate the remainder? What's the answer?
Well, the answer, not every animal will face disease on exactly the same day. So, and we know following the outbreak in the Netherlands, even following really severe disease, there were still animals at the end of that who had not got immunity from that disease. So they apparently escaped the disease. So they would have benefited from a vaccine in the face of it. What we don't know in any single one farm or flock, which animals have already been bitten and which are due to. So it's difficult to say, but yes, there are going to be animals in the same flock who may not see the disease for another couple of weeks, and they would benefit from the vaccine. It's just how much that is going to be beneficial for different people. It's virtually impossible to say.
And we are approaching the breeding season as well for many flocks. But just to confirm as well, there isn't any evidence to suggest that the Bluetongue vaccines cause any sort of infertility or will affect that in any way.
No, so the way it's a dead vaccine. The mechanism for the vaccine itself to cause infertility it's just not possible. When you do vaccinate an animal, you get a very tiny rise in temperature, but it will last for less than a day. It's completely irrelevant in terms of causing infertility in that animal. And we have so much data through Europe to show that the vaccination does not affect fertility of either males or females. And we've got semen samples, we've got really detailed information. What we do know is when disease hits, it very definitely has a distinct mechanism to affect fertility, both in males and females, particularly in males. It will affect sperm motility, volume, production, and animals that have clinical Bluetongue may be infertile for quite a few months. It takes them, if they survive it still takes them a long time to recover their fertility. So, but the problem is the disease. It is not the vaccine.
And I think, Fiona, the bull stud feedback we've got on this is really powerful. They've continued to vaccinate bulls in stud, and they've had absolutely no issues with semen samples whatsoever.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. And we have a question here. Would you still expect to see more mild clinical signs in vaccinated livestock? And I guess within this as well, there is an important area of actually reporting those clinical signs in your vaccinated livestock, because it could be potentially another serotype. But what's the group's thoughts on that?
So I think
Yes.
sorry if you're going. All I was going to say was, I think the initial feedback we got from the Netherlands was that the vaccine was basically a lifesaver, but it didn't stop all signs of Bluetongue. There were some signs seen, but they tended not to be. They weren't fatal, let's say.
But they also, in the Netherlands, that's how they found BTV12, because it was some vaccinated. I know the vet whose sheep they belonged to, they saw some signs in vaccinated sheep. He was absolutely sure he'd vaccinated them well. So they got, and it was a different serotype, that they picked up a new serotype. So that possibility is there. So yes, there may be mild signs. No vaccine's ever 100%. When you're vaccinating large number of animals, you can have vaccines that maybe miss an animal, or you can have an animal who is itself suffering from another disease and doesn't mount an immunity to that vaccine. So we don't get absolutely gold solid protection in every single animal every single time it's vaccinated, and that's the same with Bluetongue and anything else. But we do know that vaccination makes a big enough difference that if you're seeing disease in a vaccinated animal, you should definitely report it. It may be a different serotype, and that's really important.
Brilliant, thanks, Jonas. Yeah, absolutely. Do not ignore seeing clinical signs in vaccinated livestock then. Brilliant. We have another question here. Is there any evidence that vaccinations carry through to the unborn lamb or kid? And or if the animal is already milking, does the milk carry it through as well?
So on their SPCs, which is what the vaccines, they talk about maternally derived immunity. So they're worried for the first 2 or 3 months of life in lambs that those maternal antibodies will affect those lambs. So that is potentially a good thing. They're not saying I haven't answered this very well. There is a suggestion that there is some maternally derived antibodies. Yes, it does mean that you want to be thinking about, if you want to vaccinate your young stock, which not everyone does, or it's not necessarily suitable, then you should wait 2 or 3 months before you do, because of that maternally derived immunity.
And it's worth considering that too, isn't it, in terms of when sheep farmers might want to vaccinate those later lambing flocks. I guess may well want to vaccinate their ewes pre-lambing with the intention of getting that maternal transmission, I guess, whereas earlier lambers may choose not to, because their lambs they plan for their lambs to be gone before the high risk period arrives, I guess.
Yes, that's true for vaccinating lambs, but yes, this maternally derived immunity that's another good reason to vaccinate that mother alongside before she lambs, to get what you can out of the vaccine for those first few months. In the same way you do with a clostridial vaccine, you get some early protection in your lambs.
Yeah.
And while sort of talking about vaccine and lambs, we do have questions around how do farmers record vaccine in untagged lambs. Now, it's my understanding that there needs to be an individual animal ID, that vaccine needs to be recorded and correspond to an animal. And I believe it is still a requirement to record which animals have been vaccinated and reported to DEFRA. But do you guys have any further thoughts on that?
Well, it is still a requirement that recording and the reporting is done on the DEFRA website. I think in Scotland they're doing it through ScotID, but I think in England and Wales it is via the DEFRA website. And I think it's really important, isn't it, at this unknown stage of the virus, that we do know which animals are vaccinated, so that we can track what's happening in the future. It's not an easy process, it's And of course, when we're talking about sheep, there's an awful lot of numbers to upload as well. But there is an upload function for people that are using EID readers. There's a lot of sheep farmers out there without EID readers as well, and inputting those numbers manually is it's not helping, but it's really important that people continue to do it at this stage, I would say.
And I guess it's really important from a trade point of view as well, knowing what stock you're buying in and knowing that they're vaccinated and protected.
Absolutely. And I suppose even for, we talk about trade, I mean, we're talking about, internal trade and people buying breeding stock as well. If people are uncertain, there is a way to check. So it is important at this stage, I think. Although I know a lot of farmers would say it's not welcome, but it is important.
Brilliant, brilliant. And on sort of further questions on vaccinating, can vets facilitate sharing bottles of vaccine?
And this is something, so it has to be discussed for your own veterinary practice, but people should understand that the vets are under a huge amount of pressure at the moment, both trying to access vaccine for their client and also in dealing with clinical cases. So, I mean, there are definite challenges with all vaccines, splitting bottles because of how they need to be kept. But it may be, it's not impossible, and it's allowed. It just is. It just does present challenges for the vets, and people should understand that.
And agreeing with everything Fiona has said, whilst vaccine supply is challenging, if it is possible, there will be a little benefit out of this, rather than vaccine being wasted if it can be used across smaller herds and flocks.
Brilliant. And on sort of a similar strain, so can the Bluetongue vaccines be mixed? So, for example, if you, in cattle, used Bull Tarvo as the first dose and then Bluevac as a second dose, or perhaps used one as a booster, so the following year, but wasn't the same brand?
I have asked this specific question to each one of the companies, and it's never ideal because that's not how they're meant to be used. But everybody agrees we're in unprecedented circumstances, and it would be advisable to use any vaccine if you're under challenge. And they had to last year. We ran out of Bluevac last year, and people had to boost with one of the other products, and people agreed that was acceptable. So it's not ideal, but it's probably better than nothing, and it may be that people have to do that.
Brilliant. And do cattle need 2 doses this year if they were vaccinated twice last year? So if they completed their primary vaccination course last year, is it just a single booster this year that they need, or do they need another 2 doses?
So I think this is one, again, take advice from your private vet first and foremost, but I think all manufacturers are saying that if 2 doses were given with the correct window last year, then 1 single dose is all that's required this year as a booster.
Brilliant. Thanks, Neil. And how often will it be necessary to change needles when vaccinating? Or can I use a multi-vaccinator for the Bluetongue vaccine? So I suspect best practice would be to change the needle between each animal.
Best practice absolutely would be, because in the same way that a midge transmits the virus, a needle can transmit the virus between animals. Anything less than using a new needle for every animal is a risk that I would suggest you need to discuss that with your own vet. So pragmatically, have that discussion, and the fewer animals that you vaccinate with the same needle, the better. So better to do 5 or 10 rather than 50 or 100 for sure. Disinfection will reduce the risk, but there's still a risk that there's virus and blood inside the lumen of the needle that you don't get when you disinfect. And disinfection, as a rule, is definitely not a good thing in alternative circumstances when we're using live vaccines. So it's not something that, as a standard, we should be saying that's a good idea. But discuss with your own vet and recognise there's a risk. But equally, some compromise may be necessary.
And Fiona, this must be fairly critical in those hotspot areas for those unvaccinated flocks where you know that that virus is circulating, and the likelihood of one animal having it and then you spreading it to other animals through vaccination. You know, in those hotspot areas, using the same needle to vaccinate multiple animals is a real risk, isn't it?
It is a real risk, and it's not just from the vaccination either. There's other occasions where we're sticking needles in multiple animals. Every time you put a needle in an animal, if it's been in another animal, you're risking transmitting Bluetongue. So it's something for people to definitely keep aware, whether it's when vaccinating or when, for example, giving an injectable worming dose.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We have another question. Where is it possible for vets to access information regarding vaccines for camelids and goats? So there is information available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website, which industry, including the Goat Veterinary Society and British Veterinary Camelid Society, have contributed to. So please do go and check that out. We also have another one. Is there a vaccine withdrawal period? I believe this is 0 days.
Yeah. For all the Bluetongue vaccines, it's no withdrawal.
Regardless of brand, it's all 0 days. Brilliant. We have touched upon this, but just to sort of reiterate it again, does the vaccine have an impact on fertility, whether that be early embryonic loss or semen quality in bulls? Neil, I'll call on you for that one.
Yeah, so I think we've seen enough case studies on this to have, you know, an abundance of evidence that it's the disease that causes the challenge, and, you know, reproductive failures in cows, infertility perhaps in bulls, not the vaccine. That is one of the biggest myths we need to bust. No risk to using the vaccine. I think, you know, what collectively, let's say, the three suppliers have probably put 60 or 70 million doses of vaccine out and no negative feedback.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. And we have one on the age at which you can start vaccinating calves. So this person has some young calves that they would like to protect. I suspect this largely depends on the brand of vaccine used. I believe some you can use from 1 month old and others from 2 or 3 months. So would we suggest this is something to consider with your farm vet potentially when discussing vaccination?
Yeah, definitely. I think I would have that discussion with the farm vet and be mindful if the cows were already vaccinated when that was, you know, if there might be some maternal transfer protection there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. Right, I think that was most of the vaccination questions covered. Fiona, I know you touched upon this in the webinar on Wednesday around treatment considerations, but we do have a couple of further questions around that. So I'd just like to call on you to discuss sort of treatment for affected animals briefly.
Yes, the way Bluetongue virus works, it causes the small blood vessels to get leaky, so we get really, really severe signs of inflammation. So so we need to give anti-inflammatories and painkillers. It's extremely painful as well. So affected animals will often just sit with their heads in water bowls just to cool down their mouth, and they know they need to drink. So fluids are important, and having access to clean water is very important, and giving an anti-inflammatory. So the vets and different vets will use different. There isn't a single this is right and this is wrong. It's a case of using anti-inflammatories. There is an issue with using some non-steroidal anti-inflammatories because we've got issues with the kidneys. So when they've done post-mortems, they found animals have died from kidney failure, and that contraindicates giving high doses of anti-inflammatories. So vets are having to make really difficult decisions, and we recommend a reduced rate of some of the non-steroidals, and or maybe swapping to a paracetamol, which is not licensed in ruminants. There are licenses in pigs in the UK, but the vets are making complicated treatment decisions. So and different vets will decide different things. There's also the possibility to give cortisone, hydrocortisone, but bear in mind in pregnant animals that can induce abortion. So that's also a difficult decision to make. But and even when best practice, everyone's done everything they can, we still know that we can lose up to 70% of affected animals might still die or have to be euthanized. And we are asking both vets and farmers to make careful decisions based on animal welfare, bearing in mind that sometimes it's appeared that animals have recovered in the short term, and then a couple of weeks later either their hooves slough off or they still have ongoing issues weeks later, and arguably it would have been kinder to have put them to sleep earlier on in the disease. But it is a lot of difficult decisions that people are making.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fiona. And there is more information available on that on the webinar recording from Wednesday. Moving on to some Bluetongue transmission questions. So is there a risk of transmission via drenching guns if you're worming?
No, I think the risk is needles between animals. Drenching guns, I don't believe there's a risk.
Brilliant, thank you. And can Bluetongue be transmitted from the mother to the offspring through the milk?
No, it can be transmitted from the mother to the fetus through the placenta, but the virus can't be transmitted in the milk. And equally, one animal cannot transmit it directly to another animal. It has to be via a midge or a needle.
Brilliant, thanks, Fiona. And we've spoken quite extensively about Bluetongue as Bluetongue vaccination as the control measure to use. But are there any other control measures that are effective against midges? For example, would dipping help?
They looked into this a lot in Holland, and there was no evidence that dipping or porons or any ectoparasitic applications onto the animals made any difference. So the advice is, it's not. I'm afraid it's not going to help to use dipping or porons.
This is a difficult one for farmers, isn't it? Because farmers do like to do something. They know that they're at risk and they like to do something. And there's plenty of people that are using topical products for keeping other ectoparasites at bay. Blowfly and the sheep situation as well. And I accept that there is no evidence. But I guess if there are products that people use and they keep blowflies away, and they stop them even landing on the animal, is there any hope that they won't be the solution, but can they help at all? It's an impossible question to answer.
I think because so most of the products, they don't kill the midge until they've bitten, and by the time they've bitten and got killed, they've already transmitted the virus. So you're and yourself, when you go out on an evening and put midge repellent on, it might last for a couple of hours. It's it's expensive, and both in terms financially and also environmentally to have chemicals all over the animals. If the effect is only a couple of hours, it's really pointless. I'm afraid. I know everyone does want to do something, and you totally understand that, but there really isn't any evidence to show that chemical treatments have any long-term effect. So they did find that if they could house animals with proper midge-proof netting, and that's really fine netting, that did have a beneficial effect, and good ventilation as well. So if the midges do get into the building, that they're blown away. If you haven't got midge-proof netting, and arguably for the size of flocks we have, and it is completely impractical unless you've got a tiny flock and really good housing. Just housing animals in a building without good ventilation, bearing in mind that building is probably also it's close to a midden or trees, or midges will still go into open buildings, and they will bite animals. So there is some evidence that windy exposed ridges are better because midges don't like wind, keeps them away. But yeah, so not everyone has. I mean, there's a time of day as well that there's bigger risk than, you know, dawn and dusk is not great for midges, is it?
From all that discussion, you come back to the fact, don't you, that the way to protect animals is to vaccinate them. That's it, really.
Yeah, great too.
Brilliant. And it's important to note as well that all animals are at risk. Sort of all ages of sheep and all ages of cattle are at risk. Because we've got a question here that says, to what degree are spring-born fattening lambs at risk from bluetongue at the present time?
And again, they are going to be at risk, aren't they? So you talked about that maternal sort of transmission of the protection, but for those flocks that weren't vaccinated earlier, and any lambs that have gone beyond that, whatever it might be, 6 or 8 week period, they are going to be at risk. There's lots of people asking questions about this in the industry at the moment that are starting to either bring in store lambs or consider where they get their store lambs from, and they are at risk. You know, if they're coming into an area where bluetongue is circulating, it's a huge risk, and these animals are worth considerable amounts of money now too.
Yeah.
And we have
sorry, Daryl, I was just thinking, and I went through all that, how to get rid of the how to protect from the midges. There was some evidence about this shearing. Now, whether wool does protect animals to some degree, there might be some evidence to suggest that delaying shearing would be sensible. The danger, we are expecting bluetongue. The risk period is from July through to October, even into November. So, nothing is bomb-proof, but there was some evidence in the Netherlands that when they clipped sheep, it did have a slight effect on their risk of bluetongue.
Brilliant, thanks, Fiona. And sort of on that, so if you do have a positive case of bluetongue, is there then lifelong immunity against that particular strain for those animals that are positive?
I've asked a couple of cleverer people than me about this answer, and people the scientists think that you do probably get lifelong immunity from that serotype. In sheep, because so many sheep actually die from it, then you know we've lost the sheep, so we don't see that. There's definite evidence that the combination of enough animals immune and vaccination, after 2 really intense years of bluetongue 3 in the Netherlands, they then didn't have cases in the 3rd year at all. And people think that's because of pretty good immunity in animals that have, face disease.
Brilliant, thanks, Fiona. And we have a couple of questions here, which I don't suppose are ones that we can really sort of address. But there's one here about our shows later this season going to be cancelled. And I suspect this will be largely down to the individual shows and their respective bluetongue policies. But does anyone have anything else they would like to add on that one?
Just that everyone's responsible for their own biosecurity for their own animals. So if they want to protect, if they think that a show is a risk, then stay at home would be my advice for this year.
We've been talking to a lot of, I suppose, sales organisers and show organisers as well that have got sales and shows planned for later this month and beyond. And in fact, we are doing a little bit of work with Sheep Vet Society to pull together some guidance and information for those people. But again, in a way, it comes back, we need to protect trade. Trade needs to happen. It's so important for the industry, but it comes back again to vaccination is the way to protect. And there's a lot of talk at the moment that probably, if sales and shows are going to continue, in an ideal world, you want those animals that to have been vaccinated and vaccinated 28 days before the date of that gathering as well. You know, that is I suppose that's the best practice, is the ideal way forward, and show and sale organisers working with the vets that are overseeing those events should be talking about the risks, shouldn't they? They should be talking about the risks and trying to plan accordingly, particularly at this time when you know, vaccines are starting to get a little bit short, and some of the dates of these sales are less than 28 days away as well. So, but that's probably again the surefire way of trying to protect animals if they are gathering, is to make sure they're vaccinated well in advance.
And I think, Phil, so my comment was based on just a standalone show, but a show and sale is a very important part of the autumn breeding trade. So it's two different things, that definitely.
Yeah.
We're currently working on something between sheep vets and NSA with regards to sheep sales, aren't we, Phil? That should be out within soon, we hope. Yeah.
Later this week it'll be out anyway. Yeah. Middle of the week probably. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you all. We have another question here. Will the inevitable rain at the end of the drought lead to an increase in midge activity and subsequently more disease spread, or are we better off in drought and dry conditions? This is a bit of a tricky one.
Anything that increases midges is not great. So humid's not good. Swampy breeding areas, trees, middens, anything where midges can breed is not helpful. Heat is also not helpful because it decreases the EIP, the incubation time of the virus in the midge. So that's why we're getting increasing quite dramatically in hot weather. So yeah, it's hard to guess. I mean, we're not in a great situation as we are now. Arguably, if we now have a cold, wet summer, that might be a good thing. But
I think
I'm not in control of that.
No, I think it's interesting that we would have expected more Bluetongue cases last year. And last year was a dry summer, but it wasn't a hot summer, or not the extreme heat we've had this year, but it was dry also last year. This year it's dry and extremely hot. So, you know, I guess that's multiplied the challenge, but I'm not a weather expert. So what we could do with is the temperatures to drop. I think that would give us the biggest benefit.
And actually, Spanish colleagues have said, so obviously Spain is commonly a lot hotter than we are here, and they find in a hot year they see worse Bluetongue. So yeah, the heat has not been on our side this year.
Absolutely not. And we have another question here. What if you suspect foot and mouth in a case? And I suspect this is foot and mouth is a notifiable disease. This does need to be reported to DEFRA. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add to that?
I think just that the reason that Bluetongue is reportable is because the early symptoms and signs are close to foot and mouth. That's the reason it is reportable. And if you're in any doubt at all, you know, contact APHA, your private vet.
And we've mentioned quite a few clinical signs sort of within sheep and cattle, particularly on sort of the abortions and the fertility side of things. But we have a question here. Have there been large milk drops reported in dairy herds?
So I think we did see that, you know, if we go back to August 2024, when the sort of disease reared its head again in the eastern counties, that was one of the first things that people were reporting was milk drop. But that wasn't accompanied with clinical signs as it's being seen this time. And we've also heard this time of, you know, dairy cattle aborting as well. So it's yeah, up the ante a little bit.
When they've done economic modelling, certainly the drop in milk and dairy herds is often the biggest cost in Bluetongue outbreaks, isn't it? So although we're currently seeing high clinical disease in sheep, and that the milk drop in dairy cows, both in the Netherlands and when they've looked at it theoretically, have been very significant. I don't know that we currently have evidence of that in the UK, but I'm not sure that we have that information as yet. we have got an impact survey that we're giving people the opportunity to let us know what they are seeing. So the more information we can have, the better. It's not ready yet, but it's literally should be within the next few days, I hope.
Yeah, Fiona, it's a really important point to pick up on this, isn't it? Because we know that there's this lag in official data, and we also know that any affected premises are only getting up to 3 animals tested as well. So we're getting a number of premises. There is a lag between those being reported, but there's so much more information that's sitting on these farms that we do need to gather in the future. And I know people are under a lot of pressure with this, but for them to keep some very basic records of what's going on, so that when those surveys come out, we can respond to them with a level of accuracy, I think is, again, it's really important.
That would be really, really helpful, wouldn't it, Phil? Because people are trying to make measured decisions about whether to vaccinate next year or the year after, and unless we have a realistic idea of the impact on individual farmers and farms, flocks and herds this year in UK, it's hard to make those decisions. If we all thought this would happen last year, and that's why we asked people or suggested people vaccinated. Unless we have up-to-date UK information, it's hard to give good advice, I suppose.
Brilliant. And the last question is, can my animals be positive but not show clinical signs and then have fertility issues later in the year? I might turn to Neil on this one.
So I think definitely, and we'll go back to some of the case studies we have when, suckler producers have had multiple empty cows, multiple abortions, multiple dummy calves, and no clinical signs or any signs of the disease were evident, during the breeding season. So it's a definite yes. That's arguably the biggest risk, is what you can't see.
Brilliant, thanks, Neil. I suspect Phil and Fiona, that will also have an impact on scanning percentages come scanning time and on lambing.
I mean, I think one of the problems we saw last year, really, and we didn't see many clinical cases in sheep this time last year or through the summer, and there were no report of cases of sheep all the way through the winter and the spring, but we did get some pretty inconsistent scanning results around the country, I guess, and a lot of people put that down to the dry conditions last year, the drought, shortage of forage, those sorts of things. But so I don't think we know at the moment, but the risks are definitely there as well. I was just going to mention it. Fiona, you talked about these hot temperatures in a way increasing that risk of disease transmission because of the short replication period within the virus, within the midges. But we're also in a situation where a lot of farms now are experiencing severe drought and a shortage of forage as well, and that's probably compromising the general health of their flocks as well. So again, it's not easy for individuals to know what to do about that, but that focus on trying to get ewes and sheep as well as in good condition as possible, keep that body condition score up, and that it is that holistic health, isn't it? The healthier they are, the more they're going to be able to resist disease and infection and the impacts of that if they do get affected themselves. It's not easy.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much for your help. That was the last question, but does anyone have any additional comments they would like to add?
I'd like to try and find something positive, but it's very hard to find something positive at the moment. I think it's quite challenging for everyone that's suffering with this. From a cattle perspective, most people or many people have got both sheep and cattle. They will be firefighting with their sheep at the moment, and the cattle will be missed perhaps. Our advice is to go back, scan your cows early, check bull fertility, maybe leave bulls in a little bit longer. And I keep saying this now because a late calf is better than no calf at all.
And I suppose the other thing there, Neil, is where people are making difficult decisions because of vaccine supply is, so the logical thing to do when we've got lots of sick sheep is to think, I want to make sure my sheep are vaccinated. Probably the measured and strategic thing to do is, yes, definitely vaccinate your rams before breeding and your bulls, but cattle are known to be multiply the virus up better. So strategically, you might be better placed putting vaccine into cattle if you have to make that difficult decision, because they're generating more virus and infecting more midges. So I know it's logical, and I would still obviously ask people to make sure they have their sheep vaccinated, but in the face of making difficult decisions, it's possibly vaccinating the cattle is important for all of us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fiona. Phil, did you want to come in there?
Well, only just to say, I mean, it really to follow up on what Neil and Fiona said, really, and it's a really difficult time, isn't it? Because our market conditions are really strong, and yet we've got this cloud hanging over us of which is causing some real problems for people. And again, you know, if you think of livestock values at the moment and the cost of vaccines, you know, it's got to be worth doing. And I know that's no comfort to those people that are being affected right now, but you know, looking forward, we've got to get through this period, and looking forward, you know, that investment in vaccinations generally to protect stock and to promote health has got to be an investment that's worth making with livestock values where they are, and long may that they stay at those sort of levels as well. But I mean, just getting through today is really quite tough, but again, we need to convert that into longer term thinking about flock and livestock health management, I guess. Yeah,
I think probably, Zoe, one plea to end would be that those people that have a platform that gives them a relatively loud voice, to be specifically careful about what they say. There is still a lot of misinformation out there, and that's causing as much pain in some cases as the disease itself. So, you know, those people that are perhaps influencers of some sort, please, you know, don't peddle misinformation. If you don't know the facts, then come to somebody like Fiona, who, you know, are the expert vets out there that can give you the facts first.
That's an excellent point, Neil. We have seen a lot of misinformation out there over the years. Yeah, absolutely worth noting. But thank you all very much for your time. So in summary, do speak to your vet about vaccination and book in your orders as soon as possible. Remain vigilant and report clinical signs immediately to the APHA. Please do check out the webinar that we held on the 5th of August that we've referenced here. So this will be available in the description box down below. And also please do keep an eye out on the AHDB and Ruminant Health and Welfare websites for further information and guidance as well. Thank you all very much.
Thanks,
Zoe.
Thank you.